How long can a family ignore the woman who built their future? Can dignity be restored after so many years of silence? The snow crunched beneath my boots as I made my way up the long, winding driveway, the cold biting at my cheeks. In my gloved hands I carried a small, carefully wrapped package, silver paper, tied with a navy ribbon I'd repurposed from a scarf I hadn't worn in years. It wasn't extravagant, but it was made with care. That had to count for something. Before me stood the grand estate belonging to my daughter, Amelia. It glowed like something out of a lifestyle magazine. Warm lights curled along the eaves, frosted wreaths adorned the windows, and music filtered through the thick glass, mingling with the sound of clinking crystal and laughter. Inside were well-dressed guests, catered hors d'oeuvres, top-shelf wine, and my 3 children. They were all here, all except me. I paused at the massive oak door, suddenly aware of how out of place I was. My coat was clean but old, the lining thinning at the cuffs. My boots had been resoled twice. The package in my hand, my only offering, felt smaller now, too small. I had spent the past 2 years living above Mrs. Dwyer's garage, a single-room studio with a hot plate, a pull-out bed, and thin walls that didn't quite keep out the wind. After everything I'd given, that was what I had left. 2 years earlier, I'd sold our family home. The home where my late husband and I had raised our children. The home I maintained for decades, even after he passed and we were left drowning in debt. I sold it so my children could launch their dreams. "You're doing the right thing, Mama," Amelia had said, tears glistening in her eyes as I signed the final papers. "This investment will pay off, for all of us." Oliver, my oldest, had nodded confidently. "Once the restaurant's up and running, we'll get you your own suite in a guest house." And Noah, my youngest, my tender-hearted dreamer, had whispered, "I promise you will take care of you. You won't regret this." I had believed them. Of course I had. I wanted to believe them. I was their mother. I gave them everything. Oliver needed funds for his organic bistro downtown, a trendy little spot that had grown popular with food bloggers and weekend brunchers. Amelia was launching her own line of upscale loungewear and needed capital for her showroom and first production run. Noah had developed an educational gaming app and needed seed money to build a beta version. The equity from the house covered all 3 ventures. Barely. I even dipped into my modest retirement fund to help cover unexpected startup costs. For a time, I lived with each of them, first in Oliver's spare room, then with Amelia, and finally with Noah. But as their businesses grew, so did their lives. Spare rooms turned into nurseries, offices, and guest suites for clients. I became a guest in my own family, and eventually, even that invitation wore thin. When the transitions became permanent, I found a small unit to rent above Mrs. Dwyer's garage. It wasn't much, but it was quiet, and the rent was low. I supplemented my pension with... I told myself I was content. I lied. Holidays grew quieter. Calls came less frequently. Texts went unanswered. The people I'd once built my entire life around now seemed to have no time for me. I became the woman who had once been essential, now barely remembered. But tonight was Christmas Eve, and despite no invitation, despite knowing full well I wasn't expected, I had made the trip. I had wrapped the gift. I had dressed in the warmest coat I owned and walked through snow to deliver it in person. Because I still held on to hope. I rang the bell. Through the frosted glass, I could make out silhouettes in elegant attire. I heard laughter and someone clinking a glass for a toast. I waited. A moment later, the door opened. Amelia stood before me, radiant in a deep red cocktail dress. Her hair was swept into an elaborate twist. Her heels clicked faintly on the polished tile behind her. Her smile faded when she saw me. "Mom," she said, not with delight, but confusion, maybe even alarm. "I brought something," I said gently, holding out the box. "Just a small gift." "I thought I might join you all for a bit." Amelia stepped out onto the stone landing and pulled the door mostly shut behind her. I felt the sting of cold air, but it couldn't compare to the chill in her tone. "Mom, this is a private event. We have clients here, investors. It's not really the best time." "I see," I said, my fingers tightening around the package. "I wasn't aware. It's been a while. I wanted to see everyone." Her eyes flicked back through the narrow opening of the door. "You should have called." "I did, several times." She winced, but didn't deny it. "Maybe we can do lunch next week," she offered quickly. "I'll reach out." But we both knew she wouldn't, just like she hadn't returned my last 6 calls. Something inside me shifted. Years of patience, of understanding, of giving the benefit of the doubt, all of it stretched too thin. A tension that had built quietly, silently, without me realizing just how tightly it had wrapped itself around my heart, snapped. Without another word, I stepped past her into the warmth of the entry hall. The effect was immediate. Conversations slowed, people turned, music faded into the background. I stood there, in my second-hand coat and salt-stained boots, my small package still in hand. Across the room I saw Oliver by the drinks table, chatting with a group of sharply dressed men. Noah was near the kitchen, laughing with 2 women in satin gowns. Neither of them had noticed me yet. Amelia rushed to my side. "Ma!" I ignored her. Instead, I took a breath, straightened my shoulders, and spoke loud enough for the entire room to hear. "Good evening, Merry Christmas. I'm Margaret Clark, mother of Amelia, Oliver, and Noah." Silence rippled across the room like a shattering glass. For several long seconds, no one moved. Champagne flutes hovered mid-air, conversation suspended, forks frozen over plates. Every eye had turned to me, some confused, some amused, a few clearly annoyed, and among them, the only 3 faces that truly mattered were carved in chalk. Oliver had stopped mid-sentence, blinking rapidly. Noah's smile dropped as he registered my presence, his posture stiffening. Amelia stood beside me, tense, her polished facade cracking just slightly around the edges. "Mom," she whispered, low and urgent, as though trying to reverse my entrance by sheer will. "Please, this isn't the place." "I disagree," I said, my voice calm but resolute. "It's exactly the place." A few murmurs spread among the guests. A man near the fireplace sipped his wine slowly, eyes glinting with curiosity. Someone near the piano leaned in, whispering to their companion. I stepped further into the entryway, slowly removing my coat and laying it gently across a chair by the wall. My hands trembled slightly. From nerves, yes, but also from something deeper. A long dormant flame of self-possession was flickering to life. Then a voice emerged from the far end of the room. "Excuse me, did you say Margaret Clark?" I turned. A tall man in his 60s was moving toward me through the crowd, gray at the temples, suit impeccably tailored, eyes warm in surprise. "Yes," I said cautiously. He extended a hand with gentle reverence. "I'm Richard Harmon. You taught my son Evan at Lakeside Prep, Senior English, 2001. My breath caught in my chest. "Evan Harmon?" "The quiet one, always scribbling in the margins." Richard laughed. "That's the one. You took him under your wing, stayed after class 3 times a week. Helped him find his voice." "Last I heard, he wanted to study journalism," I said, unsure what had happened to the boy with the shy smile and ink-stained fingers. "He's a published author now," Richard said proudly. 3 books. He still talks about you. Says you were the reason he didn't drop out, that you saw something in him no one else did." The words landed with unexpected weight. I hadn't thought about Evan in years, but hearing that, in this room, surrounded by people who had forgotten or discarded me, it struck me like a lightning bolt of oxygen. The room was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet. Not embarrassment, not awkwardness, attention. Richard turned to the crowd. This woman changed lives. My son's life. You're standing in the presence of a legend. I glanced toward my children. Oliver looked uneasy. Noah had gone pale. Amelia's expression was frozen, somewhere between dread and calculation. Richard faced me again. We've actually been trying to find you. There's an award in your name now, the Clark Legacy Fellowship. We planned to honor you last month, but when we reached out, we were told you were unavailable, that you were living abroad. I've been in the same studio apartment for 2 years, I said quietly. Above Mrs. Dwyer's garage. The implications struck like thunder. My children had intercepted the messages, blocked the calls, buried the offers. Deliberately. I didn't need anyone to confirm it. Their faces told the entire story. I can explain, Amelia began, stepping forward with her voice dipped in professionalism. There was a misunderstanding, Richard. We were managing communications on her behalf. I turned to her, slow and deliberate. Why? She hesitated. Because you thought I couldn't handle a phone call? An email? $50,000 in a public ceremony in my name? Mom, you erased me. Amelia's mouth opened, then closed. Oliver stepped in. We weren't trying to erase you. We were trying to protect you from stress, from pressure. You've been through a lot. I stared at him. From opportunity? Noah's voice cracked. You wouldn't understand, Mom. The circles we move in. There's image. There's reputation. Oh, I said, bitterly amused. I didn't fit the image. No one answered. I looked at the box, still clutched in my hands. My fingers loosened, and I placed it gently on the side table near the piano. A photo album, I said. I spent weeks making it. From our first apartment to birthdays, graduations, your father's funeral. I thought maybe you'd like to remember. More silence. Then another interruption. A new voice, deeper, softer. Well, I certainly didn't expect this when I walked in. All heads turned. A man was standing at the entrance, tall and silver-haled, wearing a heavy wool coat dusted with snow. In his hands, he held a gift bag. His eyes met mine and lit with quiet recognition. My heart stopped. Adrian? I said, stunned. He stepped closer. Hello, Margaret. Adrian Whitmore, my first love, the man I had once planned to marry before I met my husband, the one I hadn't seen in over 40 years. What are you doing here? I managed to whisper. I was invited, he said with a glance around the room, though it seems I arrived at a pivotal moment. Amelia, flustered, stepped forward. I'm sorry, who exactly? I'm an old friend, he said, voice smooth. Margaret and I, well, we were engaged once, a very long time ago. We've recently been back in touch. A ripple of surprise passed through the guests. You never told us, Oliver said, incredulous. There are many things I never told you, I replied, mostly because you never asked. Adrian smiled at me gently. I came to bring you something. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small, dark blue velvet box. No, I said with a breath of disbelief. You didn't. Not what you're thinking, he chuckled. Not yet, anyway. He opened the box. Inside was a key. This is the key to the lake house, he said. Lake Song. I bought it back then, when we were young, when we thought we'd honeymoon there. I never sold it. I thought someday. I couldn't speak. It's yours now, he said. Whether you want it as a home, a refuge, or nothing at all, it's yours, no strings. The room was stunned, but I felt taller somehow, seen, admired, not tolerated. I turned to my children. I was going to surprise you tonight, I said. I was going to give you the deed to our family home. I found a way to buy it back, with help. I was going to sign it over to the three of you as a gift. Their faces twisted in disbelief. But now, I said, steady. I'm not so sure, and for the first time, I saw fear in their eyes. Not fear of consequences, but fear that I no longer needed them at all. The silence that followed was no longer just awkward. It was radioactive. You could almost hear the mental math unfolding in the room as guests began connecting dots. The mother, quiet and absent from public view for 2 years. A ward with no acceptance speech. The successful, charming adult children, now shrinking under the weight of exposure. Amelia was the first to react, slipping into her well-trained tone of business diplomacy. Everyone, she said, raising a trembling champagne glass. Richard, still standing near me, didn't even blink. Before we do that, he said, I have one more question. He turned toward my children. When the foundation couldn't reach Margaret directly, we contacted her emergency contacts, which were you. Are you telling me that none of you thought to pass on the messages? Not once? Noah's voice came out hoarse. There was a lot going on. We had to make decisions quickly. Decisions? I echoed. You made decisions for me? You needed rest, Oliver added, arms crossed tightly. You were exhausted, alone, and frankly, vulnerable. We didn't want you to be taken advantage of. Taken advantage of, I said. By who? People trying to give me awards? A job offer? A cottage by a lake? Adrian interjected gently. She's not vulnerable. She's capable, brilliant, and more than qualified to lead the initiative I've offered her. And as far as I can see, she's been underestimated by the people closest to her. I'm sorry, said a voice across the room, a woman I hadn't even noticed before. Young, poised, with a press badge discreetly clipped to her purse. I'm from Regional Business Monthly. I've featured each of your children in our entrepreneur series, but I had no idea their initial investments came from a single source, let alone their mother. Her eyes locked on Oliver. Would you care to clarify? Was your mother an investor or a donor? Oliver hesitated. She helped us get started, but the businesses are successful because of our hard work. Of course, I said. And when I needed a root canal last year, you told me you were too strapped to help. But 3 weeks later, you posted photos from a luxury vacation in Santorini. His face drained of color. Gasps rippled through the guests like an echo. Amelia hissed under her breath, Mom, this isn't helping. I turned to her. Then tell me, what would help? Staying quiet while you pretend I'm irrelevant, keeping up appearances while I rot in a converted attic? Her expression hardened. You're making a scene. No, I said. I'm making a point. Noah finally stepped forward. His voice cracked. We didn't mean for it to go this far. It just got easier not to deal with it. And we kept telling ourselves we'd make it right eventually. I looked at him, heart aching. Eventually never comes, Noah. I raised you to know better than this. Tears shimmered in his eyes, but he didn't look away. Then Richard, thoughtful, calm, spoke again. Margaret, I want you to know that the award is still yours. The fellowship funds are untouched. We've also been trying to offer you a leadership role on our educational outreach board. Full salary, full benefits. We just couldn't find you. You found me, I said softly. They just hid me. Amelia's voice sharpened. We didn't hide you. Richard raised an eyebrow. Then why were we told she was living abroad indefinitely? The reporter scribbled something down with purpose. The room was tense. Eyes bounced between the siblings, watching them flounder. I have a question, the reporter said carefully. Did any of you accept the grant money on her behalf? Oliver stepped back, but Amelia stayed in place, lifting her chin. I authorized my siblings to accept it in trust for her retirement. In trust? I repeated. Do you even hear yourself? I was trying to manage things, she snapped. You were barely scraping by. I figured it was better used investing in things that could eventually support all of us, including you. There it was, not for me, for them, dressed in good intentions and disguised as protection. You used my name, my work, and my silence, I said, to build your image, your businesses, your social circles. Oliver's fists clenched. You're acting like we exploited you. Didn't you? Nobody answered. Then the reporter asked, just to confirm, the funds from the Clark Legacy Fellowship are still untouched? A pause, a long, terrible pause. Amelia glanced at Oliver. Oliver looked away. You didn't, I whispered. Richard's jaw tightened. Did you cash the check? Amelia's voice dropped to a thread. The funds were held in a temporary account, with the intent to transfer them. I worked double shifts last winter, I said, so I could afford heating in that drafty room while you sat on $50,000. Amelia took a step toward me. Mom, please, let us fix this. You can't fix this with a transfer, I replied, because this was never about money. This was about worth, about dignity. You took that from me. Noah burst into tears. I didn't know, he said, voice cracking. I thought we were helping. I thought you were okay. Did it ever occur to you to ask? He didn't answer. Oliver looked like he was trying not to explode. Fine, he snapped. You want your money? Take it. Take the job. Take the lake house. Take the spotlight. But don't act like we're villains. Not villains, I said quietly, but definitely strangers. And then, slowly, I reached into my purse and pulled out a simple, worn photograph, one we'd taken the day after my husband's funeral. The four of us, arms around each other, smiling through pain. I placed it on the table. I told you then, we only have each other now, and I meant it. I've given everything to you, my time, my savings, my home. And the moment I stopped being useful, you edited me out of your lives. No one moved. The photograph lay between us like a challenge, a memory, a wound, and I was done apologizing for it. The tension in the room had reached its breaking point. All pretense was gone now. My children no longer looked like hosts of a glittering holiday party. They looked like what they were, three adults cornered by the truth, unraveling before an audience they couldn't control. Amelia was pale, her mouth set in a tight line. Oliver stood rigid, arms folded, his expression unreadable. Noah had dropped into a chair, hands covering his face, shoulders shaking. I took a slow breath, aware of every guest, every whisper, every watching eye. I'm not here to humiliate you, I said, my voice even. I'm not here to ruin your party or your image, but I am here to reclaim what's mine. My name, my story, my future. Richard stepped forward, gently placing a business card on the table next to the photo. Call me tomorrow, he said. We still want you to lead the outreach program. The offer is real, Margaret. Full salary, full control. Thank you, I said softly, my heart aching with something that felt like relief. I'll call. Adrian remained nearby, watching quietly. He hadn't spoken in several minutes, but I could sense something was stirring beneath the surface, something unsaid. I turned to treat me like a fragile thing that needed to be handled. But I wasn't fragile. I was just inconvenient. We thought we were protecting you, Oliver muttered. We didn't want you to struggle anymore. But I was struggling, I said, alone, while you thrived. Amelia stepped forward now, her voice calm but tense. What are you going to do, Mom? Cut us off completely? Walk out of here and pretend we're not your family? I met her gaze unwavering. You are my family, and because of that, you don't just get my forgiveness in a single night. Forgiveness isn't a switch I can flip. It's a road, and if you want to walk it with me, you'll have to do it step by step, not as children who expect to be absolved, but as adults willing to rebuild. Noah lifted his head. Do we even get that chance? I don't know, I said. That depends on what you do next. Then Adrian spoke. Actually, he said, his voice calm but firm, there's something else I need to say. Everyone turned to him. He reached into his coat once more and pulled out an envelope, thick, sealed, and embossed with gold. I wasn't planning to bring this tonight, but, well, the universe has a sense of timing. He handed the envelope to me. The investment package has been finalized. The funding is ready. $2 million for your educational platform. Contracts have been drawn. You're the majority stakeholder, and I've arranged a team to help you build from the ground up. A stunned silence fell. Amelia's lips parted. 2 million? Adrian nodded. She earned every penny, and this time she'll sign the papers herself. I swallowed. The weight of the envelope in my hands felt like the weight of my entire life. Everything I'd poured into other people finally circling back to me. Oliver spoke slowly. You kept this from us. I protected it, I replied. From you. Amelia's eyes burned. So you're just done with us? No, I said. But I'm done being erased. I'm done handing over everything and waiting to be seen. Adrian turned to me then, and with surprising grace, pulled out the velvet box again. I said this wasn't a ring, he said, smiling faintly. Not yet, but the key. To Lake Song, that part still stands. It's your home now, whether or not you ever want to share it with me. The murmurs started again, but I barely heard them. I looked at my children. 6 months ago, I started tutoring the grandson of the couple who bought our house. When they mentioned they were selling, I asked if they'd sell it back to me. I couldn't afford it alone. You did all that without telling us? Yes, I said simply. The same way you made decisions about my life without telling me. The guests began to shift, some murmuring quietly, others clearly reevaluating the glittering trio they had once admired so much. But I wasn't interested in shame or performance. I was interested in truth and choice. I stepped back, holding the envelope and the key, and picked up the gift I had brought, the photo album. I think I'll take this with me, I said. I have a new shelf now. The three of them just watched, frozen. Then Noah stood. Can we still fix this? He asked quietly. That's not a question you ask once, I said gently. It's one you answer over time. Adrian placed a hand lightly on my shoulder. We should go. I nodded. I turned one last time at the threshold, glancing back into the dining room, the crystal, the polished silver, the guests who now whispered not about my absence but my presence. I'm not leaving in anger, I said. But I am leaving in truth. Then I walked out into the snowy night, hand resting lightly in Adrian's, and for the first time in years I felt warm. The snow had softened underfoot by the time Adrian and I reached his car, a fine dusting settling on the windshield like a curtain falling on the final act of a long, tragic play. But for me, this wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. The silence in the car wasn't awkward. It was steady, quiet, respectful. Adrian didn't speak, not until we were halfway down the long, winding drive, past the flickering lights of Amelia's estate, past the glittering windows that had once felt so distant, so unreachable, and now looked small, contained. You were magnificent, he said at last, his voice soft, edged with reverence. I let out a long breath. I don't know if that's what I was, but I was honest. For the first time in a long time, I said exactly what I needed to say. Adrian nodded. That's its own kind of power. We didn't go to Lake Song, not yet. He dropped me at my apartment above Mrs. Dwyer's garage, and before I stepped out into the snow again, he turned to me, fingers gently grazing mine. "Margaret," he said, "you know the offer stands. Not just the house, not just the business. I want you in my life, but only if you want that too." I looked into his face, older now, yes, but still bearing that quiet steadiness that had once made me feel safe. "And again tonight." "I need time," I said honestly. "Then take it," he said. "All of it." And with that, he drove away. I climbed the familiar steps, past the chipped paint and the dented mailbox, past the string of twinkling lights I'd hung myself last December in a moment of fragile optimism. Inside, the apartment was cold, but it was mine, sparse, small, but clean. The space had held my loneliness, my exhaustion, my disappointment. It had also held my healing, my rebuilding. I stood in the middle of the room and unwrapped the navy ribbon from the silver box I had carried all night. I hadn't even opened it. It had been meant as a gift, a token of memory, of family, of gratitude. Peeled away the paper and lifted the lid. Inside was a simple locket, gold, oval, polished by hand. It held 2 small photographs, one of the children when they were young, lined up in matching pajamas in front of a crooked Christmas tree. The other, older still, a black and white portrait of their father and me, long before the lines of grief and time had creased my face. I sat on the bed and stared at it. So much history in such a small thing. I thought of Richard's words, of Heaven's novels, of the fellowship named after me, of the reporter's surprised recognition, the guests who had gone from indifference to attention in a single transformative hour. I was no longer invisible, but visibility came with a strange weight. What do you do once you're seen? Once the door of truth is flung wide open and the ghosts flee into the night? What's left in their place? Me. Just me. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual. The air smelled different, crisp, like possibility. I made tea and watched the snow fall outside the narrow window. As the kettle whistled, I sat down at my desk and pulled out the blank notebook I had tucked away months ago, the one I had once hoped to fill with memories, or perhaps dreams. Instead, I began a plan. Not just for the outreach initiative, though that would be part of it. I began mapping something broader, a curriculum rooted in emotional literacy, creative writing, and legacy work, programs for students, for single mothers, for aging women who had spent their lives being useful but never heard, for women like me. It wasn't rage that moved my pen. It wasn't revenge. It was purpose. A reclamation, a future. That evening, a knock came at the door. I opened it cautiously, expecting maybe Mrs. Dwyer. Instead, Noah. He stood there, his hands stuffed deep in his pockets, his eyes puffy, red-rimmed, his mouth opened, but no sound came out at first. I had to see you. Tootsie. It's humbling by the coat rack. Eyes taking in the room. Its simplicity, its humbling plainness. It was such a stark contrast to the luxury they'd begun used to. Maybe that was the point. "I've been thinking about what you said," he finally began. "About asking the question, over time." I said nothing. He took a breath. This is me asking. Not for forgiveness, not yet. I know that has to be earned, but for the chance to try. He looked older than he had a week ago, and not in a way that made me sad. I gestured to the chair by the window. "You can sit," I said, "if you're willing to listen." He nodded gratefully. And he did sit, and he did listen. And for the first time in what felt like years, we began a real conversation, just the beginning. But beginnings matter. Spring arrived quietly that year. It didn't announce itself with grand fanfare, but crept in softly with birdsong outside my window, the subtle scent of thawed earth and the tentative green buds curling on the old birch trees by Mrs. Dwyer's fence. Life, it seemed, was gently nudging me forward. It had been 3 months since that Christmas Eve, 3 months since I stepped into my daughter's house uninvited, since I spoke the truth I had carried alone for too long, since I reminded my children and myself who I really was. In that time, I had written proposals. I had spoken to lawyers, to educators, to women's organizations. I had met with Richard Harmon and his team over warm lunches in sunlit boardrooms, not because they pitied me, but because they believed in me. I had become Margaret Clark again, not just a mother, not just a teacher. The Clark Legacy Fellowship was no longer just a name attached to a check. It was a living, breathing program, with classrooms, with real students, with plans to expand into rural areas, community centers, and public libraries. I was finally, beautifully, overwhelmed, but not by grief, by purpose. And then, one morning, just as I had finished sorting through another batch of student submissions, the phone rang. It was Oliver. He didn't stumble over his words. He didn't offer grand apologies. He just said, "Mom, I'd like to see you, if you'll have me." We met in a quiet cafe halfway between his restaurant and my studio. He came alone. No entourage, no pretense. His face was drawn, not tired but thoughtful, older somehow. We spoke like adults, about mistakes, about pride, about regret. He didn't ask for forgiveness that day, but he didn't make excuses either. He told me he'd dissolved the trust, returned the fellowship fund, rebuilt the family guest suite, but hadn't dared call it mine again. "I see now," he said, sipping slowly from his coffee. "We wanted to build something great, but we thought we could do it by standing on your shoulders without ever looking down. I see you now. I really do." That was enough. A week later, Noah invited me to a small school fundraiser, one he helped organize, not for show, for real. He introduced me to his students, not as my mother, but as the woman who taught me everything worth knowing about resilience. And Amelia, she took longer. But a letter arrived in early May. Long, handwritten, uneven. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't easy to read, but it was honest. She admitted to things I never thought she'd admit to. About jealousy, about control, about the pressures of always trying to look perfect. She told me she had stepped down from her own company's board temporarily. Not out of shame, but to reflect, to regroup, to grow. And at the end of the letter she wrote, "If you are ever willing, I'd like to walk with you on that road you mentioned." Step by step. I read the letter twice, then I placed it in the photo album I had once tried to give them, now resting in its rightful place on a shelf in my living room. That June, I moved out of the apartment above Mrs. Dwyer's garage, not because I was running from it, but because I had outgrown it. Adrian was waiting at Lake Song, the lake house, our lake house. When I arrived, the sun was just beginning to set, casting golden light across the water. The porch had been repaired. The garden had been revived. The bookshelves, those he'd left untouched. "They're yours to fill," he said, arms crossed loosely, smiling. We sat on the porch that night in silence, wrapped in blankets, sipping tea as fireflies blinked to life in the distance. "This place?" I whispered. "It feels like memory." He looked at me. "Then let's make new ones." A month later, the first Clark Legacy retreat was held on site. Writers, mothers, daughters, women who had been overlooked for too long. They came to listen, to speak, to write, to remember who they were. And I sat at the front of the room, Not behind the curtain, not tucked into the corner, not hidden in a kitchen or forgotten at a table by the wall, but at the head of it, where I belonged. Later that summer, all 3 of my children came to visit. Separately at first, then, one quiet afternoon, together. They were awkward hugs, a shared meal, a walk by the lake. They helped me hang photos, new ones, of all of us, not because we were perfect, but because we were beginning again. And I knew as the wind rustled gently through the trees and the sun set over the water that I had done it. I had taken back my name, my voice, my life, and it was no longer just warm. It was mine.